There comes a time in every human life when the battle between the known and the unknown self must be confronted. This confrontation is not with the outer world, but with the inner one, the domain of the shadow. The shadow is that hidden dimension of our psyche that carries everything we have denied, rejected, or refused to acknowledge about ourselves. It holds our impulses, our pain, our fears, and the truths we have buried under layers of identity. When the shadow dominates your energy, life feels fragmented. You find yourself repeating patterns, drawn to situations that wound you, and blaming the world for your unrest. You live as a divided being, one part that wears the mask of what society approves, and another that quietly resents, desires, and suffers beneath that mask. But when you begin the work of integration, when you cease running from the parts of yourself you once feared, subtle transformations begin to occur. These are the signs that your shadow no longer dominates your energy. Sign 1. You no longer fear your own darkness. The first sign is an acceptance of the parts of you that you once tried to bury. You no longer see your anger, envy, or fear as enemies, but as messengers, aspects of your humanity asking to be understood. You realize that wholeness is not achieved by amputating the dark, but by allowing light to touch it. To make peace with your shadow is to stop waging war within yourself. Sign 2. You stop projecting your pain onto others. The unintegrated shadow seeks mirrors in the outside world. It blames, judges, and condemns what it secretly fears or despises in itself. But when you begin to see through your projections, compassion emerges. You recognize that the traits you reject in others often reveal what is unresolved in you. In that moment, judgment transforms into awareness, and the world ceases to be your enemy. When you stop fearing your own darkness, you begin to understand it. Every human being carries a hidden dimension within themselves, a part that holds what has been denied, repressed, or rejected throughout life. That is the shadow, the unseen reservoir of emotion, memory, and instinct that we often wish did not exist. Most people spend their lives running from it, covering it with layers of performance, success, or spirituality. Yet the paradox of transformation is that what we run from the most contains the very wisdom we seek. Wholeness begins the moment fear ends. When we stop looking at our darkness as an enemy and begin to recognize it as a misunderstood ally, fear of the shadow is born from the illusion that darkness is dangerous, that it will consume us if we acknowledge it. But the truth is, the act of repression is what gives the shadow its power. When we suppress our anger, it becomes resentment. When we deny our envy, it becomes bitterness. When we hide our pain, it manifests as defensiveness or self-sabotage. The darkness we refuse to face takes on distorted forms because it has been pushed into the unconscious, where it acts without our permission. The more we try to be only light, the more violently the shadow demands attention. To stop fearing it is to begin to see clearly. Understanding your own darkness does not mean indulging it. It means observing it with honesty and compassion without judgment or justification. It means asking yourself, why do I react this way? Why does this person or situation disturb me so deeply? Why do I feel threatened by something harmless? Every strong emotional reaction is a signal, not of weakness, but of a hidden wound. To turn toward that discomfort instead of away from it is the beginning of inner mastery. The shadow loses its dominance the moment you can look at it directly and say, I see you. Many people mistake self-knowledge for self-condemnation. They believe that to admit darkness is to admit failure, but it is the opposite. The courage to confront your shadow is the highest form of strength. It is easier to build a mask of perfection than to admit imperfection. It is easier to perform virtue than to live with authentic complexity. Yet, when you look into your own depths without fear, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing to appear pure or right. You become real. You begin to integrate what has been divided. Integration is not a one-time event. It is a slow, ongoing conversation between light and dark, consciousness and the unconscious. You learn that anger can protect boundaries, That fear can sharpen awareness, that sadness can deepen empathy. Each emotion that once felt dangerous becomes a tool when it is understood. The shadow is not inherently negative, it is simply unacknowledged energy. The moment you accept it, that energy returns to you as strength. To stop fearing your own darkness is also to stop fearing the darkness in others. When you recognize your own capacity for jealousy, deceit, or cruelty, you no longer need to pretend moral superiority. You see the shared humanity beneath behavior. This understanding creates compassion, not a soft, sentimental kind, but a deep, grounded empathy that comes from knowing the complexity of being human. You realize that everyone is fighting an invisible battle with their own shadow, and you no longer contribute to that war through judgment or denial. When fear dissolves, so does fragmentation. The inner war between what you are and what you think you should be comes to an end. In that quiet reconciliation, you discover a new sense of energy, not the frantic energy of pretending, but the calm strength of authenticity. You begin to move through life with less defensiveness, less need to control or explain. You become both the light and the dark, both the wound and the healer. You understand that darkness is not the absence of light, but its cradle, the place where new awareness is born. Facing your darkness demands humility. It asks you to drop the illusion of being a finished being and to step into the endless work of becoming whole. It requires patience with your contradictions and forgiveness for your flaws. But as you continue this work, fear gives way to curiosity, and curiosity becomes understanding. You learn to navigate your inner world without panic. Emotions that once overwhelmed you become guides instead of threats. What once felt like chaos begins to reveal its hidden order. When you no longer fear your own darkness, you stop living a divided life. You no longer project your pain onto others, no longer hide behind false positivity, no longer chase perfection as proof of worth. You walk with awareness that all light casts a shadow, and that both are necessary for depth, for authenticity, for truth. The wholeness you were searching for was never about eliminating the dark, but about embracing it with open eyes. The end of fear marks the beginning of wisdom, because it allows you to meet yourself completely, without resistance, and to finally see that every part of you, even the hidden and difficult, belongs to the same sacred whole. You stop projecting your pain onto others when you begin to see that what disturbs you in the world is often a reflection of what is unresolved within yourself. The human mind has a remarkable tendency to avoid direct confrontation with its own wounds. When pain, guilt, or shame becomes too uncomfortable to face, the psyche pushes it outward, disguising inner conflict as external fault. You see it when someone irritates you for no rational reason, when you find yourself criticizing others harshly, or when a situation feels unfairly personal. In those moments, you are not responding to reality as it is. You are responding to the parts of yourself you have disowned. Projection is the shadow's most subtle and deceptive game, and until you recognize it, it keeps you trapped in a cycle of blame and resentment. The process begins unconsciously. You meet someone and immediately feel dislike or jealousy without understanding why. You convince yourself that they are arrogant, lazy, or unkind. Yet often beneath that judgment lies a truth you have not accepted about yourself. Maybe they express confidence that you secretly wish you had. Maybe they show freedom that reminds you of your own restraint. The qualities that irritate you in others are mirrors reflecting traits you have suppressed. What you cannot accept in yourself, you will condemn in the world. To see this clearly is to begin dissolving projection's grip. When you start to observe your reactions instead of justifying them, awareness expands. You realize that every emotional charge carries information. Anger reveals where boundaries are weak or pride is wounded. Envy points toward unlived potential. Criticism exposes your own unmet standards. The outer world becomes a living mirror of your inner state, and life itself turns into a teacher. This awareness does not come from self-blame but from curiosity. The question shifts from what is wrong with them to what is this showing me about myself. That simple shift marks the beginning of emotional maturity. As projection fades, compassion emerges naturally. You no longer see people as enemies to your peace, but as participants in your growth. You recognize that every human being carries their own shadow, their own unhealed parts, just as you do. The person who wounds you is often acting from their pain, not their essence. You stop taking things so personally because you understand that most behavior is driven by unconscious forces. This realization softens judgment. It does not mean excusing cruelty or tolerating abuse, but it allows you to respond from understanding rather than reaction. When you no longer project, your relationships transform. Instead of seeking partners, friends, or colleagues to complete or validate you, you begin to relate from wholeness. You stop expecting others to carry the burden of your unhealed emotions. You no longer demand that they act a certain way to keep you comfortable. This shift creates genuine connection, because authenticity replaces expectation. Communication becomes clearer. You listen without defensiveness. You speak without hidden agendas. You begin to see others as they are, not as extensions of your own wounds. Projection thrives in unconsciousness. It dissolves in awareness. The moment you acknowledge a trait within yourself, it loses the need to appear in others. The people who once irritated or intimidated you suddenly seem less threatening. Their behavior no longer defines your mood or sense of worth. You realize that peace was never about changing others. It was about reclaiming the energy you had unknowingly scattered across the world through judgment and blame. This process is humbling because it forces you to confront uncomfortable truths. You begin to see how many of your conflicts were fueled not by others' faults, but by your own resistance to self-knowledge. It can be unsettling to realize that you have been fighting your own reflection. Yet this awareness brings immense freedom. You stop wasting energy on resentment. You stop feeding old narratives of victimhood. You start owning your part in every situation, not as guilt but as power. The ability to say "this feeling is mine" is one of the most liberating realizations of consciousness. As projection dissolves, a new form of seeing emerges, a seeing without distortion. You can look at another person, even one who has hurt you, and perceive their humanity. You see both their flaws and their beauty without needing to divide them into good or bad. You recognize that the same forces that shape you shape everyone else. This depth of vision allows for true empathy, not the pity that comes from superiority, but the understanding that arises from shared imperfection. When you no longer project your pain onto others, you reclaim your inner authority. You stop allowing emotions to dictate your perception of reality. Life becomes less about defense and more about discovery. Situations that once triggered you now become opportunities for awareness. Each challenge becomes a mirror, showing where more integration is needed. Instead of being caught in endless cycles of reaction, you begin to move from a place of centeredness. The energy once wasted on blame turns into creativity, clarity, and compassion. In truth, projection is a defense mechanism of the unhealed self, but awareness transforms it into a pathway toward integration. By owning what is yours, you free yourself from illusions about others. You begin to see reality as it is, not as your wounds interpret it. The end of projection marks the beginning of authentic relationship with others, with the world, and most importantly, with yourself. Freedom begins when you stop living as a victim of circumstance and start recognizing that your emotions, choices, and reactions are your own responsibility. For much of life, people are conditioned to believe that happiness, peace, or pain are outcomes of what happens around them. They think fulfillment comes from others' behavior, from luck, or from the right timing. But as long as this belief remains, a person remains bound, a prisoner to everything external. The shadow thrives in this victim mindset, convincing you that life is unfair, that people are the cause of your suffering, that destiny has betrayed you. It's a seductive illusion because it allows blame, and blame is easier than self-examination. Yet true liberation comes when you realize that even if you cannot control the world, you can always control your response to it. That realization is the foundation of self-mastery. Taking responsibility is not about self-blame, it's about reclaiming power. When you see your reactions not as automatic but as choices, life begins to shift. Every moment presents a space between what happens and how you respond. Most people live unconsciously in that space, letting fear, anger, or insecurity dictate their behavior. But awareness allows you to step in, to pause, to choose differently, to act from clarity instead of impulse. Responsibility is not heavy, it is empowering. It gives you back authorship over your life story. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" you start asking, "What can I learn from this?" That single shift transforms chaos into meaning. Living responsibly does not mean denying emotion or suppressing pain. It means acknowledging that your emotional world is your domain. You stop saying, "They made me angry," and start saying, "Anger arose within me." You begin to study that anger, its roots, its patterns, its purpose. You learn to respond rather than react. This shift might sound subtle, but it changes everything. You no longer move through life as a collection of conditioned reactions. You become conscious, deliberate, aware. Responsibility is not control, it's awareness in motion. The shadow resists this awareness because it thrives on projection and blame. It whispers that others are the problem, that life has wronged you, that you are powerless. But the truth is the opposite. Responsibility dissolves the shadow's influence. When you accept that your perception shapes your experience, you take back the energy the shadow once used to keep you small. You no longer spend days waiting for someone else to change before you can feel peace. You stop demanding life to be perfect before you allow gratitude. You become the source instead of the seeker. There is profound freedom in understanding that suffering is not punishment, it is information. Every difficult situation holds a lesson about your inner world, where you still cling, where you still resist, where you still believe yourself separate from life. When you take responsibility, pain becomes purposeful. You stop labeling experiences as good or bad and start seeing them as necessary teachers. This does not mean passivity or blind acceptance of injustice, but it means approaching life with consciousness rather than resentment. You can still set boundaries, take action, and pursue change, but now your actions come from strength, not reaction. Owning your emotions also means releasing the illusion that anyone else can complete or destroy you. You begin to see relationships, careers, and events as reflections of your state of being, not as the sources of it. When things fall apart, you do not collapse with them. When people disappoint you, you do not lose your center. The stability once sought outside is now cultivated within. This inner steadiness does not come from control, but from deep acceptance. You recognize that everything that arises, joy or pain, is part of your evolution. Responsibility allows you to see that life is not happening to you, but through you. When you live this way, resentment fades. You stop replaying the past as a justification for your limitations. You realize that holding on to blame only keeps the wound open. Taking responsibility is how you close it. It's how you stop identifying with the story of your suffering and start living the story of your strength. You begin to trust your ability to navigate whatever comes, not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer at war with it. This level of ownership also brings humility. You start to see how many of your struggles were sustained by your resistance to what is. Responsibility teaches you that control over others is an illusion, but control over yourself is liberation. You understand that peace is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of alignment. From that place, decisions become clear, actions become intentional, and energy becomes directed instead of scattered. You stop leaking power through blame, gossip, and complaint, and channel it into creation and growth. Every moment of awareness is an act of reclaiming your life from the unconscious. Each time you take ownership of your thoughts, emotions, and choices, you dissolve a piece of the shadow that once dictated your behavior. You begin to live as the author, not the character, as the one shaping reality through consciousness. Responsibility becomes the quiet revolution of the soul, a return to inner authority. You realize that freedom is not given by life, it is claimed through awareness. And once you claim it, no circumstance can truly take it away. Solitude becomes strength when you no longer run from yourself. Most people fill their days with noise, motion, and distraction, anything to avoid being alone with their own thoughts. The silence of solitude can feel intimidating because it exposes what lies beneath the surface, the fears, regrets, and emotions that are easy to suppress in the busyness of life. Yet, the very discomfort that solitude brings is the invitation to meet yourself. When you stop resisting it, solitude ceases to feel like isolation and begins to reveal its power. The power to reconnect you with the depth of your being. In solitude, you come face to face with the parts of yourself that have long been neglected. The outer world falls silent, and the inner one starts to speak. You begin to notice the subtle patterns of your mind, how often it drifts into worry, how quickly it clings to memories or imagines futures. This awareness can be unsettling at first, but it is profoundly clarifying. Without external noise to distract you, you start to hear your own voice. Not the voice shaped by expectation or habit, but the authentic one that has always been buried under the demands of others. The longer you sit with yourself, the clearer that voice becomes. Many people mistake solitude for loneliness, but they are not the same. Loneliness is the absence of connection. Solitude is the presence of self. Loneliness craves company because it fears emptiness, while solitude embraces aloneness as a sacred space of regeneration. When you make peace with being alone, you stop seeking others to fill your emotional voids. You no longer depend on constant validation or distraction. The energy that was once spent avoiding silence becomes energy available for creativity, reflection, and growth. The shadow, however, resists solitude because it thrives in avoidance. It feeds on external stimulation, on the endless scrolling, constant talking, and habitual busyness that keep you from noticing its whispers. When you finally turn inward, the shadow's illusions begin to dissolve. You start to see how much of your restlessness came from unacknowledged pain. The thoughts that once frightened you lose their grip as you allow them to surface and pass. Solitude becomes the arena where the unconscious reveals itself not as an enemy but as a guide. In this quiet, you rediscover the rhythm of your own inner world. You begin to sense what nourishes you and what drains you. You realize that much of what you once chased was noise, not meaning. You start to prefer depth over distraction, truth over comfort, and presence over performance. This inner alignment cannot be found in a crowd. It grows in the silence where you learn to listen to life itself. Solitude teaches discernment, the ability to recognize the difference between what your soul needs and what your ego wants. As you grow comfortable in solitude, your relationship with the external world transforms. You engage with others not from need but from wholeness. You no longer fear disconnection because you have found connection within. This independence does not make you cold or detached, it makes you authentic. You can love more freely because your love no longer arises from emptiness. You can stand alone because you no longer mistake solitude for abandonment. The approval or rejection of others loses its power to define you. You carry your own center wherever you go. The strength born from solitude is quiet but unshakable. It is not the strength of control but of surrender, the kind that comes from knowing you can face your own company and still find peace. In solitude, you learn that your worth is not dependent on productivity, attention, or praise. You begin to value being over doing. The mind slows, the body softens, and the heart opens. You become present enough to feel life directly, without the filters of anxiety or desire. Solitude also awakens creativity. When you no longer fill every moment with noise, imagination returns. Insights arise unforced. Ideas surface from the stillness like reflections from deep water. Many of the world's greatest works of art, philosophy, and discovery were born from this state, not from isolation, but from communion with the deeper currents of the psyche. Solitude gives the soul the space it needs to breathe, to dream, to remember its vastness. Eventually, you realize that the fear of being alone was never about the absence of others. It was about the fear of meeting yourself. Once you cross that threshold, silence becomes your ally. You find refuge in stillness rather than escape from it. The peace you discover there is not fragile, it is rooted in the acceptance of all that you are. In solitude, you learn that nothing is missing. You begin to feel at home in your own presence, grounded in the simple awareness that you exist, and that existence in its purest form is enough. True peace is not achieved through control, perfection, or avoidance. It arises through integration. The shadow within every person feeds on resistance, the constant effort to deny, fix, or suppress what feels uncomfortable. We are taught to seek calm by controlling circumstances, by trying to keep everything and everyone in order. We call it peace, but what we are really chasing is temporary relief from fear. The more we try to manipulate life into stillness, the more restless we become. Real peace cannot be forced. It comes when you stop fighting the natural movement of life and accept its rhythm. It begins when you allow everything within you, the pain, the joy, the confusion, the clarity, to coexist without resistance. When your shadow dominates, peace feels impossible, because your mind is constantly at war with itself. You resist sadness, you avoid uncertainty, and you try to silence anger as though emotion itself were a threat. But peace does not mean the absence of storms. It means learning to remain centered while they pass through. It is the still point in the middle of chaos, the quiet awareness that watches thoughts and emotions without identifying with them. When you begin to integrate your shadow, you no longer need to push away what feels dark or imperfect. You allow the full range of your humanity to exist, and in that acceptance, tension dissolves. The moment you stop resisting what is, peace enters naturally, not as an achievement, but as a natural state of being. The desire for control often arises from fear of being hurt, fear of uncertainty, fear of losing what you love. Control gives the illusion of safety, but it comes at the cost of peace. When you try to control outcomes, you create inner rigidity. You resist the flow of life, and every deviation from expectation feels like a threat. But when you release control, you begin to trust life's intelligence. You understand that everything unfolds according to a deeper order, one that the mind cannot always grasp. This trust does not mean passivity, it means responding with awareness instead of reacting from fear. In surrender, you discover that peace is not something to earn, but something that has always been within you, waiting for permission to surface. Integration means bringing all aspects of yourself into harmony. It is seeing that the emotions you once rejected, anger, jealousy, sadness, have a purpose. They are signals guiding you toward understanding. Anger shows where boundaries are needed. Sadness reveals what you value. Jealousy exposes your hidden desires. When you stop labeling emotions as good or bad and begin to listen to them, they transform from chaos into clarity. Integration turns inner conflict into inner communication. You no longer waste energy suppressing parts of yourself. Instead, you learn from them. This cooperation within creates a stable foundation of peace that no external event can shake. True peace is quiet, not because life becomes simple, but because you no longer demand it to be different. You can face pain without collapsing, disappointment without bitterness, and uncertainty without panic. You stop searching for peace in possessions, people, or achievements because you recognize that those things are transient reflections, not sources. You begin to sense that peace exists beneath every experience, like this stillness beneath waves. It was never gone, it was only hidden by resistance. To access it, you simply stop struggling and allow life to be as it is. This kind of peace does not numb you, it awakens you. It allows you to feel everything without drowning in it. You become present, deeply consciously aware of what is happening inside and around you. When the mind quiets, even ordinary moments become sacred. A breath, a sound, a touch of sunlight. These simple things reveal the serenity that is always available when you stop searching elsewhere. The need to escape fades because you realize there is nothing to escape from. Even your pain has beauty when it is met with understanding. When you live from integration, peace becomes your natural response, rather than a fragile state to protect. You no longer depend on perfect conditions to feel at ease. Chaos may still exist around you, but it does not enter you. You become the observer instead of the victim of life's fluctuations. This is not detachment born of indifference, but equanimity born of depth. You feel fully yet remain steady. You engage with life, but you are not consumed by it. The world may move fast, but inside you remain anchored in stillness. Ultimately, peace comes from alignment, the harmony between your conscious self and the parts of you once hidden in shadow. When you embrace every aspect of your being, you no longer divide your energy through resistance. Wholeness replaces struggle. Peace is not found by escaping the human experience, but by embracing it completely. It is the stillness that arises when you finally stop running from yourself, when you allow everything to belong, and when you realize that the calm you were chasing outside was always waiting quietly within. When your shadow no longer dominates your energy, something remarkable happens. You begin to live authentically, without the constant need to prove yourself. You stop performing for approval, validation, or love, and start existing from a place of inner truth. For much of life, the shadow drives us to chase worth through achievement, attention, or perfection. It whispers that we are never enough as we are, that something must be earned before we deserve peace or love. This illusion fuels a lifelong performance. We smile when we want to cry, we agree when we feel resistance, and we shrink when our soul longs to expand. But when the shadow is brought into awareness, when those hidden insecurities are faced and integrated, the performance ends. What replaces it is not arrogance, but calm authenticity, a quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. Living authentically begins with honesty, not with the world, but with yourself. You start noticing the ways you betray your truth just to fit in, the forced politeness, the false enthusiasm, the self-censorship that keeps peace but kills aliveness. The integrated person no longer needs to wear these masks because they have made peace with both their light and their darkness. They know that authenticity does not mean being perfect, it means being real. When you accept your flaws, you take away the shadow's power to shame you. You no longer hide what makes you human, and that honesty becomes a source of quiet strength. People often sense this difference. The energy of someone who no longer needs to impress feels grounded, unshakable, and magnetic. When you are still ruled by the shadow, you live in a constant state of comparison. Every success of another person feels like your failure. Every rejection reopens an ancient wound of not being enough. But when you integrate the shadow, the need to measure your worth against others fades. You stop chasing significance because you recognize that you already are significant. Your value becomes intrinsic, not conditional. You can appreciate others' light without dimming your own. This shift from competition to self-acceptance transforms your relationships because you no longer engage from insecurity but from wholeness. Authenticity invites authenticity. When you stand in truth, others feel safe to do the same. A person who no longer performs for validation becomes deeply free. They don't seek applause, nor are they destroyed by criticism. Praise no longer intoxicates them. Rejection no longer defines them. They see both as reflections, not verdicts. When you are grounded in authenticity, external opinion loses its grip because your compass is internal. You act from alignment rather than approval. Decisions are no longer made to please others, but to remain faithful to your values. You say no when you mean no and yes when your heart says yes, not out of rebellion, but out of respect for your own truth. That integrity may cost you certain relationships, but it brings you peace beyond measure. To live authentically also means to live without the exhausting need to curate an identity. You stop shaping yourself into what looks admirable, and instead grow into what feels true. The integrated self allows contradictions, strength and softness, confidence and doubt, light and shadow to coexist. You are no longer fragmented by who you think you should be and who you actually are. This alignment creates a calm energy that feels both powerful and effortless. You realize that authenticity is not something you perform, it's what remains when you stop pretending. As you live from this integrated state, purpose begins to emerge naturally. You no longer chase meaning as though it were hidden somewhere outside yourself. Instead, everything you do, your work, your relationships, your solitude, begins to feel aligned with your essence. Authenticity makes you trustworthy to yourself You know your motives, your limits, your desires. That self-awareness removes confusion and self-sabotage. The choices you make, even the difficult ones, begin to reflect who you truly are, not who the world expects you to be. The peace that arises from authenticity is profound, because it doesn't depend on anything external. You no longer need success to feel valuable, nor love to feel whole. You can stand alone without loneliness, and walk among others without losing yourself. You become gentle not because you are weak, but because you no longer need to defend an image. Your words carry more weight because they come from truth, not performance. Even your presence changes. It becomes calm, rooted, and quietly luminous. When the shadow no longer dominates, you no longer live through fear or pretense. You are no longer a collection of roles, but a unified being. Every choice reflects your essence rather than your wounds. You live not to prove, but to express. You are not chasing life anymore, you are participating in it. This is the freedom of authenticity, to exist as you are, without apology, without disguise, and without the restless hunger to be seen, because you finally see yourself